views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren. Jaime, we thank you for joining us. For people who ask what this show is all about, well, we give you an opportunity to bring you a forum discussion that provides a deeper understanding into many inequities that people face, as well as we get a chance to present multiple points of view. And then we also promote civic engagement. And so we encourage you to stay tuned. We've got a very special social justice forum. Stay with us. The show starts right now. And welcome back to the show. Next Gen Men is a not-for-profit organization redefining what it means to be a man by promoting positive masculinities, as well as healthy relationships and gender equity in schools, communities, and workplaces. Next Gen Men create spaces to engage and educate and empower boys and men around gender and equality. Their work helps build emotional intelligence, as well as giving youth the skills and resilience they need for healthy relationships, as well as positive mental health. The youth program also follows the pillars of self-health, as well as others. Joining me now to share their point of view on this matter, I am joined by the Executive Director of Next Gen Men, Stika, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
How's it going?
It's going all right. You know, the pandemic definitely threw us for a loop, but the hustle goes on.
Yeah, well, we're making lemons out of lemonade is what they well, making lemonade out of lemons, I should say, and that's what all of us are trying to do. But talk to me about reaching young men, because obviously your organization really deals with that, and it deals with gender as well as gender equity. But for somebody who can know more about Next Gen Men, share with us.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I think in terms of kind of the origin story, I like to use the Spider-Man metaphor, you know, when the spider bit you. You know, I'm an incredibly privileged individual. I'm a tall, straight, white male. And despite all that, and, you know, being a varsity athlete in my late teens and early 20s, I struggled with depression. And at 19, my coping mechanism was binge drinking and partying, and ended up flunking out of the first school I went to. And then at 22, I bounced back. I was, you know, all academic athlete, honor roll. You know, life should have been great at that point in time, and I'm still miserable. And really coming to understand this masculine script of you got to be tough, you can't show emotion, you can't ask for help. And it wasn't even anything that anyone was putting on me. It was all internal dialogue, which goes to show how strong that culture is that we're swimming in. And so I'm struggling with this. And meanwhile, my best friend, Jamal, who's one of my co-founders at Next Gen Men, unfortunately lost his 13-year-old brother to suicide in 2007. And we think it was due to homophobic bullying and you know, being a young Black youth, that's extra difficult. And so we really just wanted to intervene, to role model new possibilities of what it means to be a man, specifically in and around that 12 to 14-year-old age group, as you're losing your innocence of boyhood and starting to act like what you think it means to be a man, which unfortunately in society is often around, you know, power and domination, competition. And so we wanted to role model through that.
And when you talk about looking at role models and finding positive role models, you're trying to provide an avenue where you can have positive role models, have positive discussion as it pertains to young men. What is it that we can feel, did you feel, will bridge the gap in the lives of these young men, particularly when it comes to the issue of gender?
You know, I think under the banner of feminism over the last 70 plus years, we've had a really rich conversation about women's roles and identities in society. And then obviously, you know, trans and non-binary identities have kind of come a far way as well too. And we've been pushing that gas pedal, but simultaneously pressing the brake with men and boys, right? Because we haven't been having that same conversation. So we're kind of spinning our tires right now. And so how can we have that conversation to create these new possibilities for men and boys to transform their roles and identities from the ones that their fathers and their grandfathers had, so that they can thrive in this new society that we're working towards? I think that's really where we're at. And, you know, I have a lot of hope for that next generation, because, you know, comparing myself when I was 12 to 14 to them, you know, I was a knucklehead. They know way more than I know. And, you know, all they need right now is just people who give them permission to stay open-hearted and open-minded.
And when we say being permission givers, you're a permission giver because you're helping them to actually say it's, you know, it's okay to be this, it's okay to feel this. Talk to us about the struggle, because you talked about your co-founder and the struggles that that his brother had. Talk to us a little bit about the struggles and how you're able to give people permission to be all right with struggle and at the same time empower them as well.
Totally. I mean, it kind of goes down to our vision statement. We're working towards a future where men and boys feel less pain and cause less harm. And the origin and where that really sparked for me was from Bell Hooks' book, Will to Change. I'm going to paraphrase, but there's a quote in there that says, essentially, the first act of violence that men and boys commit is not that against women, but that against themselves. And should they fail to emotionally and psychologically cripple themselves, they will be met by a group of men that will do it for them, right? And so I think a lot of men can see themselves in that, right? And when we look at, you know, rising rates of violence and inequality and those kinds of things, it's often hurt people that hurt people. And so how can we lead with empathy for the harm that men and boys experience in patriarchy, but also follow with accountability for the harms that they then cause to others, right? And I think that's the struggle where, you know, on the one hand, you have quote unquote men's rights activists and all that stuff, like, you know, people who are saying, oh, we're being marginalized now and whatnot. And they feel the pain and the harm of patriarchy, but they don't have the words for it, and they haven't arrived to kind of that framework around it. And then on the other hand, there's people who, you know, treat men as pariahs and you know, they're up to no good and those kinds of things. And there's that accountability piece, but how do we build that bridge between that image of like, yeah, men and boys are harmed within the patriarchal system, and we hold them accountable for the harms that they commit?
So when we talk about the power of mentorship, I think that's one of the things that help out in this whole dynamic, right? You have to have positive mentors. So give me a little bit about the mentorship component, what you found that to be like, and how it's actually benefited the youth that you're serving.
Going back to that idea of being a permission giver, right? Like in that moment, you know, we've created so many girls empowerment programs, but often boys are left with just sports. And, you know, and that's an oversimplification on my part too, but let's play with it a little bit. But when you have those mentors who are maybe not your father, maybe you had a father figure at home, maybe you didn't, maybe you get a coach, maybe you have a teacher, or those kinds of things. Are those men reinforcing those patriarchal and traditional masculine norms? Or are they giving you permission to see new possibilities? Are they leading with vulnerability? Are they comfortable around people of different sexualities? Are they treating women and girls with respect? Are they using inclusive language? Are they creating space for others, right? And that's really, I think, the power of role modeling, because the more multiple masculinities that you can see, the less likely you are to subscribe to this one that, you know, media and pop culture is pushing towards us of, you know, the fast cars, the sexy women, the, you know, those kinds of things. And you can see, hey, I don't need to be that or like push myself into this man box. There's other ways that I can manifest in the world.
How do you deal with the issue of vulnerability amongst the young people? Because we know that as men, we're not always the most vulnerable people, right?
Well, it's a bit different during the pandemic, but like there's a great example from our youth programs in the before times. You know, you see women coming together and they're like, oh my God, your hair, like it looks so good, right? They just pay each other compliments right away. And guys rarely ever do that, right? And so in our youth program, we have snacks. And in order to get the snack, you have to pay another participant a compliment. And in the beginning of the program, it's always like, yeah, man, I like your shoes, right? But then as we go through this journey together and we're building capacity in them, it's like, hey, man, I really appreciated earlier in class when you had my back in and around this thing, right? And so, you know, showing them that, you know, paying a guy a compliment or, you know, being vulnerable and sharing an emotion isn't going to result in like, that's weakness, let's get them, but like, that's actually building connection and bonds and those kinds of things.
Yeah. So how do you go about attracting the young men to your program?
That's been a struggle a little bit through the pandemic. I'm going to use a really dramatic word. I don't necessarily mean it, but we got deplatformed because our platform was the school boards, right? So administrators, educators would say, hey, we need the Next Gen Men program in our school, and we'd come and do it. And in Canada, where we do a lot of our work, there's been lots of, rotating school closures. I think in New York, it's probably been similar as well, too. And so the school board is just committed to keeping their kids educated and healthy, and all the power to them. But how do we reach the youth through this? How do we add value when we can't necessarily be with them? So we pivoted onto a platform called Discord. I don't know if the viewers know that, but it's predominantly a video game chat platform. And so if we're going to be working with 12 to 14-year-old boys, we better be on a video game chat platform. And last summer, we built a digital summer camp on that. And that's kind of continued through the school year, what we call NGM Boys Club, where we create space for them to have social connection because many of them are isolated at home through the lockdowns. Mental health support, just checking in with them, making sure that they're doing okay, taking care of themselves, as well as like a little bit of academic support, not in the sense of like tutoring or anything like that, but like, oh yeah, online school sucks. Like, let's make sure we get our stuff done, right? And so really just building a space, and that's been really exciting because, we got kids from California to Massachusetts to across Canada because, online there's no borders, which is pretty sweet. Silver lining.
Yeah. When I use the term equity leaders, what does that mean to you?
Equity Leaders is our workplace facing arm. Nonprofit charities, a really tough business model. And we know that a way that, when we're talking about engaging, educating, and empowering around gender inequality, that's a huge gap in corporate spaces, right? Like if you ask a lot of corporate leaders, what is the number one gap to, achieving equity, closing the wage gap, getting representation, those kinds of things, many people will say it's, the male pale and the stale, right? And so how do we get in those spaces and work with those individuals who see equity work or equality work as a potential loss to them and reframe it as, what do you gain, right? Like, do you gain better mental health? Do you gain better relationships? Do you gain more respect with these inclusive practices? And so, there's the broad field of diversity and inclusion, but Equity Leaders really specializes in working in male-dominated workplaces, finance, tech, resource extraction, construction, and bringing these conversations that those guys need to have into those spaces.
How hard is it having these conversations? I mean, breaking through the door with some men could be, we're very masculine and we're very rough and tough. And you've said it before, that vulnerability is not always there. How long does it take to develop that where we can actually get past the surface and really delve into some real serious stuff?
At the root of things, I think a lot of us always have this question of what's in it for me, right? And a lot of the conversation is positioned as these other people need these things, right? So I often talk about, how many executives do we know that are on their second marriage, their kids hate them, and they're one bad day away from a heart attack, right? Like, is that healthy masculinity? Is that what you want to like aspire to be? Your bank account might look nice, but are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Amongst suicide rates, the number one, we know men are 3 out of 4 suicides. The number one age range is 55 to 65. And it's because a lot of men are suffering divorce, job loss, identity crisis in and around that age. And so when we look at that, it's like, how are we harming ourselves, pushing ourselves to these ideals? And how can we do that better? And then everyone else benefits for that as well, too, as we kind of deal with our own stuff.
Yeah. So for people who want to get connected, how do they go about being a part of Next Gen Men?
Yeah, on all the social media, we're at Next Gen Men, even Facebook, which I had to like go back and forth with a church in Atlanta for a couple of years to get that handle. So I'm pretty stoked about that. But on the website, you can check us out at www.nextgenmen.ca.
And so when you talk about the work, what do you see things going? I mean, the summer's going to be here. You're saying there's some challenges with the school system. How do you see things rolling out for you going forward in the summer?
I'm really excited that we have vaccines and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm uncertain that we'll be able to pull it off before the summer. So I think we're going to be doing a digital summer camp again. So if anyone's interested in, creating a positive space online, I know there's the question of screen time, and a lot of parents are probably, not thrilled that their boys are spending that much time, but I think it's what you're doing with that screen time, right? Are you doing a first person shooter, or are you taking part in a positive boys club? So, that'll be out there. But yeah, we're just, I told the team when the pandemic came that, positive masculinities, healthy relationships, mental wellness, gender equity, they're not going away, right? Those are things that society needs. The only way that we fail is if we're overly committed to one way of doing it. So let's get creative and let's find new ways to put it out there.
Yeah. And so if people want more information, of course, they can get in touch with Next Gen Men as the summer continues to come. The digital virtual learning platform will be available. But let me ask this before we close. Out of all of the things that you offer young people, what is it that they most gravitate to within your program?
The space to be seen and heard, I think, right? Like, we live in a culture where, we kind of shake our heads and say, oh, teenagers, right? But they have these like complex internal lives that they're grappling with, and just having a space to kind of put that out there and have someone affirm them and walk them through that and make them know that, no matter what's going on at home or at school or whatever, that they're seen and they're heard, I think is probably one of the biggest value adds we can give them.
Well, Jake, I want to thank you for taking the time and being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. Continue the great work that you're doing, and hopefully as summer progresses, we'll see some more young men who will take part and then also potentially be transformed. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thanks so much, Daren.
All righty. Listen, we're taking a quick break. We've got more on the Social Justice Forums. We're returning right after this.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet,
Welcome back. Releasing Aging People in Prison, better known as the RAPP campaign, is an independent grassroots organization as well as a policy project. The campaign challenges a fundamental pillar of mass incarceration, reliance on a system of permanent punishment, a racist culture of retribution and revenge rather than rehabilitation and healing. RAPP focuses on aging people behind bars, many of whom are long-termers convicted of serious crimes. Their goal is to dismantle the racist punishment system and promote the use of key mechanisms for release, such as parole, compassionate release, clemency, and policy changes. Joining me to share a little bit more in this conversation, I'm joined by the director of the Release Aging People in Prison RAPP campaign, Jose Saldaña, and we thank you so much for being with us, Jose.
And thank you for the invite, and I'm surely happy to be here.
Good. When we talk about aging people, an aging population, particularly in incarceration, it's a controversial issue. We have to admit, there's a lot of people who have some sensitivity to the matter, and then you have your sticklers who say, you know, you got to do your time. Talk to us a little bit about the work that you're doing and why you feel it's important.
Well, we seek to end mass incarceration, at least counter the policies that created mass incarceration, and promote racial justice to the release of older and aging people in prison. Everybody ages in prison. And we're talking about a population that from 55 on up, men and women who have already languished in prison for 3 to 4 decades, and who have been mentors, educators, and even scholars during these decades of incarceration, they pose the least risk to public safety, yet they are the most difficult to win release. So we're actually trying to address the legacy of racism in our criminal justice system through the release of the most vulnerable people toward decarceration period.
And when we talk about aging populations, give me a little bit of an insider's view. When we talk about those who are aging in prison, what are some of the things that maybe the general public does not know that maybe we should be paying attention to?
Well, a person that's 55 years old in prison and has languished in prison for decades, this person is closer. Chronologically, this person is closer to 65 than 55. Due to the underlying health conditions that most people have as they age in prison and the lack of adequate medical care. The New York State prison system have actually reduced the longevity of Black and brown people to 58 years old. That means in the last 10, 11 years, over 700 people 50 and over have died in New York State prisons. And the average age of death was 58 years old.
Wow. So when we talk about the issue of mass incarceration, obviously, we know that Black and brown people do more time in jail, even though we make up less of the population. Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, talks about mass incarceration. How are you tackling this issue? Because we know that not only do you deal with the incarceration issue, but you got to deal with the sentencing issue, which is where much of your work comes in.
Yes, for literally decades, you know, Republicans have controlled the policies of New York State. So advocates have gotten very, very little meaningful reforms in the criminal justice system. So we advocate for 2 bills that would actually change the whole release process in New York State. The first bill addresses the most inhumane sentences given to Black and brown people over decades. And this bill actually provides that if a person has reached 55 years old and has served 15 years, he or she will automatically be entitled to a parole release interview. There are no guarantees. This bill actually gives hopes to men and women who, in all likelihood, will die in prison. And we're talking, let me just back up a little bit, because we're talking about intergenerational incarceration when we say mass incarceration. We mean grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, all in prison during the same period across New York State. Just imagine just imagine what that looks like. A grandfather having a grandson somewhere in a prison cell somewhere in New York State, as well as a father. So if this were white people that were subjected to this, we would probably call it neo-genocide. So back to the question, now we have to address this inhumane justice that Black and brown people have been subjected to. And this bill is a means or an approach of addressing it. But the bill by itself won't matter much if we do not provide another bill, which we call the Fair and Timely Parole Bill. This bill was just passed in the Crimes Committee a couple of hours ago. it will now go to the New York State Senate. But this bill provides that the parole board will have to evaluate whether to release a person based on whether this person is a current risk to public safety. And that word, that phrase is very important because no longer would they be exclusively allowed to say that you pose a risk to public safety based on a crime that was committed decades ago, and in some cases, over 4 decades ago. And we also advocate for the New York State Parole Board to be fully staffed with 19 parole commissioners, all who believe in redemption and value human transformation. So these 3 initiatives, we believe, will go a long way toward at least correcting the evils that mass incarceration has inflicted on our people and assure that the next generation will not be subjected to it.
What kind of response have you gotten? I mean, I know you said one just got out of committee right now, headed towards the Senate, but what response are you getting from elected officials just in conversation about the bill?
Well, we've had substantial co-sponsors. We surprisingly, even during the pandemic, some of these electors have actually co-sponsored our bills. So we believe, we're optimistic that in an era now where the Democrats not only are the majority, but are the supermajority, and we are getting some younger Democrats actually being elected into office, more to the left, we think that we can probably get something happening this session.
So where do you see things going as far as, you know, we're in a budget season right now. We're also in that bill season where things are going forward to the table. Are you optimistic that this will get to the table and voted up or down real soon?
Yes, this is not just a moral issue. This also has fiscal implications. Just imagine it takes up to $240,000 to actually house one elderly person a year. So if we got over 9,000 elderly people, if we could just release half of those, look at the hundreds of millions that would be saved and could be allocated for much needed social services in our communities.
Also, let's talk a little bit more about legislative matters, because there are those bills on the table, and there's a lot of advocacy that still goes around the prison release system, or I should say prison release within the system. Talk to me about what are some of the other things that people, the public, should be made aware of when it comes to advocacy for those who are aging.
Well, I think the media seems to highlight the most horrible cases of people who are released from prison. But what the media doesn't advertise, the media doesn't cover, is the most successful ones. Like myself, I'm formerly incarcerated. I was released after 38 years. And there are literally dozens of me, because few of us do get out. And unfortunately, more die in prison. But those who do get out come out here, and we are perhaps the most civic-minded individuals in our communities, and we are overly concerned with the plight of our youth. And we are the ones, we are the original credible messengers. You don't hear about us, but we are those credible messengers who are going into the worst communities in our city and reaching these at-risk youth who will more than likely, without any guidance whatsoever, end up in prison.
Yeah. What is it like for a family that has to deal with a person that is aging in prison?
Well, mass incarceration has devastated families across our communities and will continue to do so unless we correct this evil. You know, we advocate for the persons to be released at their first appearance before the parole board, rather their 14th or 15th or 20th appearance when they're too old to be productive. Release men and women at an age where they can still be productive and fulfill their role to the fullest to their families and to the communities, and they won't be a burden.
So for people who want to find out more about your work and what you're doing, how do they do that?
Well, just go to our website, contact RAPP, that's RAPP campaign.com, and you get all the information you need to get involved in our RAPP, in the RAPP campaign. Also, to contact your legislators, your state senators, state assembly, and tell them that you support the release of aging people in prison. You support these reforms because they are a moderate solution to the injustices that mass incarceration has created.
So there'll be some who are critics who say, listen, you know what? Sounds good, but I'll use Jerry Blue is the one who committed a heinous crime years ago, a very violent crime years ago. I'll even go so far as to say maybe even took a life. But Jerry wants to be released. In a case like that, where there's violent crimes involved, where do you side and what does it look like in terms of release?
Well, Jerry, your example of Jerry should not define that justice in New York State is revenge and perpetual punishment. We should not use a few handful of cases to define justice for literally tens and thousands of people. That we're talking about a system that would impact tens and thousands of families across New York State. That we have to have a system of justice that first and foremost values human transformation, and that we believe that every human being is redeemable, has the capacity toward being redeemed.
So if a judge sentences somebody to life and says, hey, okay, you're sentenced to life, you're saying somewhere around 55, that individual should probably be getting a look?
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost,
no matter the crime.
Irrespective. And let me just say that we are a campaign. RAPP is a campaign that relies on the history. You know, we value the history of social and racial movements that fought against these injustices. And our principles and values stem from the history of resistance to social and racial injustice. And we know that from the very beginning of the creation of the United States of America, the enslaved people were excluded from the human race. Even legal scholars of the settlers excluded the enslaved people from human race. And from that moment on, everything we got today, we fought for. Every single thing from voting on up. So now we cannot turn around and exclude anybody from parole justice because we believe that all human beings that are incarcerated have redeeming value.
Right. So how do you answer the family who says, listen, that individual that you're advocating for, maybe a person that actually took a life, but now they want to have the benefits of life through early release? How would you answer a family?
Well, first I'd have to say that we are supported by the biggest crime victims organization in New York State, the Downstate Coalition of Crime Victims, as well as quite a few victims of sexual violence, because we all realize that victims and those who harm people are not totally different. The gap between us is not as wide as people make it to be. In most cases, especially in New York State that I can speak about, we've harmed our own. And that's a major problem. And we come out to heal that harm, not create more harm, to stop others from doing the harm that we did. And the truth of the matter is that if we believe that human beings should get a second chance, we should not exclude anybody from this. Unfortunately, we do not have a system that actually heals the victims of crime. We think that in prison, I've created programs myself to address this issue of those who commit harm are really those who can be a major part in the healing process.
So talk about what can we expect coming up from you in the near future?
Well, hopefully we can get some of these reforms. We can start addressing what criminal justice in New York State should really look like, what it should reflect, the values that it should reflect, that the values that our communities keep our communities closely knitted. And I think that in the next session or so, we should actually have a major role in defining what justice should look like in New York State.
For people who want more information, of course, they go to your website. But talk to us a little bit about before we go, COVID, how that's impacted your work, and how much has it slowed it down, if at all?
Well, it has slowed it down. As you know, the population that we advocate primarily for in New York State, they're the elderly, they're the most vulnerable. They have been the most vulnerable for decades. In fact, elder people in New York State face a health crisis every day that they're incarcerated. So when COVID hit, this made matters super urgent. And we organized compassionate release campaign calling on the governor to release several hundred of these elderly people that we identified by name who all have underlying health conditions. We're talking about people not just 55 years old, people in their 70s and have languished in prison already for decades. They pose no risk to public safety. It's a humanitarian crisis that we're dealing with. It's no longer a criminal crisis. We can't look at it from that lens, that the governor should grant clemency to these people, because if they get infected, there's a possibility, a great possibility, that they may not make it. And some of my friends have actually passed away from COVID-19.
Jose, I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums. Appreciate you coming and sharing a little bit about that aging population and early release. Thanks much.
Thank you.
All righty, we're taking a quick break here on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be back with more show right after this.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently, learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
There's a special election on Tuesday, March 23rd, and if you live in any of these neighborhoods, you'll want to pay attention. Your councilman, Andrew Cohen, is now a judge, and there are 5 candidates looking to replace him. Whoever wins on March 23rd will join New York City's primary lawmaking body, making decisions that affect you, your family, your home, and even your workplace. Starting in 2021, New York City will use ranked choice voting in primary and special elections for local offices. Ranked choice voting simply means that voters can rank up to 5 candidates in order of preference, instead of casting a vote for just one. You can still vote for just one candidate if you prefer. You can learn everything there is to know about the District 11 City Council race and the candidates by visiting ballotpedia.org and riverdalepress.com. Stay informed, and most importantly, make sure you mail your absentee ballot the day before Election Day on March 23rd, or safely head out to the polls to have your vote count and your voice heard.
And welcome back to the show. Sankofa is a social justice organization enlisting the support of today's most celebrated artists and influential individuals in collaboration with grassroots partners to elevate the voices of the disenfranchised and promote justice, peace, and equality. The organization focuses on issues of the injustice, particularly for disproportionately affecting the disenfranchised, the oppressed, as well as the underserved, which left unaddressed will continue to impact the lives of many individuals and remain a scar on the nation's moral character. Sankofa is committed to creative, diligent, and effective work to root out systemic violence and help build a culture supporting a more humane and decent world. We're pleased to be joined to share a little bit more. I'm joined by the Executive Director of Sankofa, Gina Belafonte, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
When we talk about the issues, of course, the issues of injustice continue to reign supreme in our society. Give us a little bit about the work of Sankofa.
Sure. Sankofa is founded by my father, Harry Belafonte, and it was created because we saw the need to not only educate, activate, and motivate artists, but also allies in service of grassroots movements. So we began to have gatherings of artists and thought leaders to be in conversation together to talk about issues. And what we also realized was that there were so many issues that we wanted to be able to focus on, as well as there are many artists who have different sort of heartstrings to different issues. So we chose juvenile justice, mass incarceration, income disparity, immigration, and then we took on the overall banner of violence so that we could be first responders culturally to the issues of, let's say, war, domestic violence, eco-violence. And we use art and culture as a tool to educate folks, to shine a light on specific issues. We find that art really opens up the heart and is able to send messages of hope, reconciliation, healing, and also shine a light on very, very important systemic issues and problems in our communities.
And when we talk about the issue of injustice, it continues. We talk about criminal justice. That is a major issue, mass incarceration. Talk to us about your work and what you are finding in the area of injustice.
Well, I mean, as many of us know by now, hopefully, most of the men and women behind bars are men and women of color. Our Black and brown brothers and sisters are far more likely to be arrested or shot by police than our non-melanin counterparts. And especially as it relates to juvenile justice issues, there's so many young people who find or have no hope. And then there's many who do and have no place to engage their interests, engage their imagination. And so we have been able to take programs and support programs into juvenile halls and into maximum security prisons. And Sankofa is a supporter of many programs that do that work and is also innovating around that work in partnership with other organizations. Right now, we're on the cutting edge of technology, working on a virtual reality project that will assist returning citizens who have been incarcerated and in the system for 20 years or more, who sometimes come home and they feel like they're on another planet. And so we're creating virtual reality experiences to bring inside prior to release so that our brothers and sisters have a better chance at acclimating back into life and into home life, to do the simple things like order food off a menu in a restaurant. When we go into some of our restaurants, all of the bathrooms are now automated. They flush for you, they wash your hands for you. A lot of our brothers and sisters don't know about that. They weren't around when those things were created. And so that's some of the work that we're doing there. We also, with an organization called Creative Acts, that is executive directed by Sabra Williams, there's a great juvenile justice program that we have around civic engagement and engaging young people and helping them to learn about their rights and voting rights. And we're proud to say that we went in this last election prior to the election, and 100% of our participants from our juvenile justice civics program voted in the last election.
Yeah. What is the key for you that you're finding out when you talk about youth activism? Because I know for yourself, you got involved as a youth early, and I'm sure you had a great mentor in your father. But talk to us about that, the fact of engaging youth, because some people find this wall to get that engagement going forward. What have you found to be the secret sauce for you guys in terms of getting youth involved and engaged?
Well, Sankofa.org did a huge civics program. And what we did was, and what we have found ongoing just in the way in which we organize, is that you can bring activities and ideas and strategy to a community, but it's best first to listen and to hear from the community what it is that it feels it needs, what it feels it wants, how it describes itself, before you impose what you think it might need. So we did a lot of conversations with young people, and we said, what do you want to know about civic engagement? What do you find confusing about the voting process? What do you want to share with your peers? What do you want to tell them? So what does a peer-to-peer engagement look like? And after uncovering a lot of the things that they had confusion around, it was very similar to what many adults have confusion around. When you see on a down ballot, for instance, as it relates to voting, all the judges that you have to figure out, who are they? What are their records? It can be very intimidating, and you feel disempowered to go and sort of engage. And so we wanted to bring opportunity for peer-to-peer conversation, and also to empower our young people, to meet them where they're at and let them lead us. Because in fact, as we get older, our future will be in their hands. And so it's important to engage, I think, young people in a way that is creative, in a way that is meeting them where they're at, whether it's musically, bringing music to it, sports to it, something that engages their imagination, and something in a way that they feel that they can be empowered by and understand what it is that we're talking about.
Was it a hard push to get them to the voting booth?
Not this time. I mean, there were a lot of people who were resistant to vote for this person or that person. And
right.
We weren't really, we obviously, personally, we were concerned on who was going to vote, who was going to be elected in this last election, but we really wanted to just engage them and empower them, to let them know that their voice matters. When you want to have certain things done in your community, if you want to have more spaces and places to go after school, if you want to have more Wi-Fi, if you want to have more access to technology so that you can further your own education, whatever your needs are, if you want more athletic clubs or whatever, which candidate who's running is going to help you realize the things that you want in your neighborhood, and make that choice, make an informed choice, not just because of what you hear a whole bunch of other people talking about.
Right. Talk to me a little bit about the wealth gap. In the 60s, we know that gap was there. It's pretty huge. At the same time, when you talk about the wealth gap right now, it's almost equal to what it was in the 1960s, dealing with the whole issue of income inequality. Share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing and trying to bridge that gap and better people's income.
You can't, for me, I can't really talk about the wealth gap without talking about how this country was founded. This country was founded on the genocide of Native American peoples and stolen bodies for profit. We were brought here from the continent of Africa to engage in this capitalist experiment. And we were the labor force that built this country, period, end of sentence. And while we worked for centuries to build the wealth of this country, it was being passed down through generations of white men and women, because we did not have access to that kind of wealth. We were prohibited from having that kind of wealth because they knew in this capitalist experiment what wealth equaled in those days. So if we jump cut to our modern day society, we have always been excluded from the wealth opportunities, whether it was, we were excluded from the very basics, when it was education, when it was ownership of businesses, whether it was how, for instance, the police force was even created, which was during slavery and slave catchers. I mean, we have to go into the history to understand why we have been excluded from the opportunity to engage in this capitalist experiment. And we also have to know really about capitalism. And capitalism, you know, if you've got a lot of winners, then you know, rest assured, there's a lot of losers right behind. So I think that what we're looking to do and what we're trying to do is really break down what equity looks like. How does equity translate in a modern society? What do we as a collective need to have access to in order to create and generate wealth? And so I'm interested in doing more work in talking to communities about what equity even looks like. Because right now we have, for instance, the Modern Day Poor People's Campaign. And that campaign is extremely important to help us not only remember the campaign from the early 60s, but also to have a deeper understanding of the wealth gap and why it exists and how it exists, and how we can come together in community to support each other and invest our dollars back into our community and toward each other.
When we talk about activism, obviously advocacy, policy, strategy are all very important. For you, starting out as an activist, what was the most important thing that you latched onto to get you hooked to where you are today?
Well, I was born into a family of activists, both my parents activists. My mother was really the one who nurtured me the most in my physical, emotional, and intellectual involvement. She would have me sit around the table, lick stamps, stuff envelopes, be in the presence of. Many of the strategies of the civil rights movement were discussed and coordinated in my home. I was very young at the time, but I was a sponge, and all the people and the vibe, the essence, all of that stuck with me. And then, you know, someone the other day said, "What would you tell your younger self?" And I said, I think I would tell myself some things, but I would also ask myself some questions. First, I would say to my younger self, relax. Second, I would say yes and no to everything. And then I would start asking myself some questions. What are you good at? What brings you joy? And how can you combine those two things and sustain yourself in your life? So that is really, I think, what has helped me stay a student of civil rights activism and cultural organizing, because it's something that's in my heart that I just have to do. I can't not do it. Injustice is everywhere. And my grandmother told my father, if you go throughout a day without confronting the issues of injustice, then you have not really been of service and contributed. And that stuck with me. And I feel like every single day I'm trying to figure out how to not only be of service, but how to bring joy and how to engage and collaborate with folks so that people feel that we are building community and people have agency together.
I want to talk about two things, being an artist and an activist. Your father was an artist and also an activist. That work continues in the things that you do right there. But give me your take, if you will, on getting artists to become activists and using that platform in such a profound way.
Well, you know, when my father was working with Dr. King and doing introductions to the Kennedy administration, later on, much later on, once that relationship had begun, Dr. King had said to my father, we must win them to our cause. And, you know, a lot of artists, especially who gain a tremendous amount of celebrity, you know, they're not a monolith. Artists come in all different shapes and sizes. They come from different backgrounds. Their relationship to their own celebrity and wealth comes at different cost and a different way in which that they engage. And so for me, it's really about, one, helping an artist find their authentic voice as it relates to social justice activism, or where they might have interest in shining a light or elevating a cause. But it's also what is really authentic to them. there sometimes is nothing worse than seeing someone support something that you know authentically is not really who they are or what they're about. And so we do a lot of conversations with artists, talking about issues. We work with artists when they bring us projects that they have that they were just inspired to do, but they don't know what to do with the project or what to do with their artistry. And we help guide them, and we also call upon them to support things that we're doing so that they can use the power of their platform to raise the consciousness and elevate the issue.
You got some great projects coming up too. Share with our viewers a little bit about what you've got coming up in the near future.
Well, we've just come off a huge civic engagement with this last election. We also came out of a huge sort of pivot with COVID-19, making sure that the mental health of our community was being serviced. We facilitated and guided meditations for the community. And right now we're working on a few things. One is we're doing a workshop production for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough on a platform called Clubhouse. Right now it's only for iPhone or iPad users, but we're bringing a workshop of this piece to talk about the legacy of Ntozake Shange, first of all. Also taking a deep dive into the text to talk about rape, misogyny, women's rights, Black women's struggle and triumphs, to talk about sisterhood. And so that will be coming on March 20th, and we're very excited to be doing that. We're also working still with our youth and engaging civics programs. And as I mentioned before, we're doing this VR project that we're very much excited about, that we're raising money for, in order to bring experiences to our incarcerated men and women who have been locked up for upwards of 20 years, who are coming home and having tough times, coming back into the community, understanding how things work, being able to relax in certain situations and not be triggered to potentially recidivate back to prison.
So for people who want more information about Sankofa before we go, how do they find out?
Well, certainly you can find us across all social media platforms, Twitter, IG, Facebook, at sankofa.org, and on our website, which is sankofa.org, SANKOFA.org. And for those who don't know, Sankofa is a Ghanaian word, meaning go back and get it. And one of the Akan symbols of the word Sankofa is of a bird in mid-flight with its head turned back, beak open, retrieving an egg from mid-air, symbolizing we must retrieve what we have left behind, the origins of who we are, our youth, in order to move forward.
Gina Belafonte, we leave it there. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, we've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forums. What we invite you to do is stay connected to us on our social media platforms. That's BronxNet TV, and always the website is BronxNet.org. We invite you, come back next week. We continue to elevate the discussion, promote civic engagement, and have you find out more about us here at the Social Justice Forum. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care and God bless.